Hey y'all, Chief Red here back with part 2 of my recruiting series, and today we're talking strategy. If you've come across this video and need help getting started with recruiting, go to my channel and check out part 1, which covers the basics. I'll also link it at the end of this video. The overall idea is to gain as much influence as possible, but how you do this matters if you're going to win recruits. It's also important to remember that you can't get everyone, and that's okay. Most of your roster can be progressed through training, and they're probably not going to play until the second season anyway, unless you're at a lower tiered school and need them to play. Now, keep in mind, there's no specific rule on how to do this. This is all my personal opinion and strategy, but hopefully it helps you out. So let's get into it. All right, so point number 1 is going to be to take advantage of the preseason week. If you are just starting your dynasty, the preseason week is going to be right before, week 0, right before the season starts. And if you've already played a season, it's going to be right after the transfer portal and before week 0. But I feel I've seen a lot of people skip this week, and it's really important because this is the only week that allows you to do scouting and offer scholarships and nothing else. During this week, that's all you can do is scout and offer scholarships. So it is really important to take advantage of that time, and you have more time than you would in the regular season. So it's important to stack your recruiting board up and then use that time to do as much scouting as you can, even on guys that you don't think you're going to keep, because this will allow you to weed out the people that you don't want and then narrow it down to, 25 to 30 guys that you want to basically approach. And then at that point, after you've scouted, you get a better idea of what you want. You can offer your scholarships to everyone. Scholarships only cost 5 hours per scholarship, and you're going to get those hours back next week anyway, right? So your scouting hours that you spend and your scholarship hours that you spend come back to you the next week, right? So you may spend all of your hours, but then you're going to see them pop back up. So this is really, really important, and I can't stress this enough because it does give you a head start, and you want to get out to as much of a head start as you can, especially if you're trying to compete with these high-powered schools. All right, so for point number 2, this is more about the overall goal here, right? So in general, the whole idea is to, obviously, you want to spend as many hours as you can on whoever you want to target, and you use that to gain influence so that they will eventually arrive at a commit decision. The whole goal here is that you want to be able to manage your hours. Managing hours is going to be the entire point. You don't want to spend too little hours on anyone, but especially on people that you really feel like you want or people that you really need, right? So if you have a 5-star quarterback that you're trying to go after, if you spend 5 hours or 10 hours or even 25 in some cases, you might not get very far, especially if you have to compete with, a team like a LSU or Bama or somebody like that, right? So you want to be able to make sure that you're putting the hours that you need into the people that you really want, and then everybody else kind of takes a back seat, if that makes sense. But the key is that the hours are not going to just stay locked. You can move hours around, and the whole goal is to shift your hours from week to week, right? If you think about it, if you were in real life, you're not going to just put in, however many hours a week over and over and over again without shifting them around to talk to different people here and there, right? So it's the same principle. You're going to go in and you're going to say, okay, my number 1 guys that I have at the top of the board, these are the guys that I'm going to target the most. So I'm going to talk to them probably the most. 50 hours a week on my star quarterback, on my star running back, on my star defensive tackle, whatever, whoever it is, you're going to spend the most hours you can there. Well, then when week 2 comes, you're going to turn around and say, you know what? We've actually made some pretty good progress on him. Let's go ahead and kind of slow down and pull some hours from him and go put them into somebody else so that I can actually gain some ground with this guy. So you may have a receiver that you put 25 hours into week 1, and you may have a quarterback that you put 50 hours into week 1. Well, if you gain a significant amount of ground after that week, then you may want to steal some hours from the quarterback and go put them into the receiver just to catch you up because you've got time. That's the biggest thing to keep in mind. is that it seems like you might run out of time, but in reality, these processes take a long time throughout the season. It might take some players, weeks just to get to their top 5, while some guys might move pretty quickly. It really varies from player to player, but there's no real timetable there, but you just have to like gauge it based on how quick they're moving, right? If you got other schools that are not really talking to a recruit, then that might be the time to say, you know what? I'm going to take my time as well, and I'm going to steal this guy's hours and put them on somebody else. Or if it's somebody you really want, you might want to use that delay and actually get ahead. It's really a case by case basis. And I can't give you a one size fits all on a lot of this stuff, but it really just depends on you being able to gauge it and being able to monitor and manage your time accordingly, right? And the thing is that that's going to really be important when you're talking about rebuilding a school. If you're at a 2-star or a 3-star or something like that, then you're going to really have to manage your time, and you're really not going to be able to get all the recruits, right? Because you're just not going to have the resources, right? You might have 500 hours, which is not a lot of time at all. And that's where, like I said, scouting in the preseason is going to come in. And that's also where, managing your time between these recruits is going to be super important. All right, so let's talk about soft selling, swaying, and hard selling. All right. So in this particular situation, this is where you're going to do the actual recruiting part. This is where you're going to reach out to the players, and try and uncover as much as you can about them. The entire point is to gain influence, remember? So when you go in to your recruiting tab and you look and you see the general actions, as I call them, when you see that, basically you're going to do this initially because you won't be able to soft sell, hard sell, or sway yet. You do this up until a recruit gets to their top 5 stage. Okay, once they get to top 5, you'll be able to schedule visits, sway, soft sell, or hard sell. Okay, now it's important to keep in mind that the sway mechanic is not something that you're going to use on a regular basis. It is something that is specifically a strategic type of thing. It's something that you use if you're kind of behind, and if you have bad my school grades in a certain category or in 2 categories, then you can try and sway a player to basically shift their ideal pitch. Once you figure out their ideal pitch, if you have like a C- in something, and you're going up against a school with better grades, then you might want to sway them to something that might be a little bit better, where you can get maybe all A's or, a couple A's and a B or something like that. So it really just depends. But sway is not something you're going to use often, so I'm not really going to talk about that. Now, when it comes to soft sell and hard sell, like I said, that's not available until they get to their top 5 stage. So up until that point, you have to use your general actions to gain that influence. Next to the general actions, you're going to see these green triangles. And basically, that's going to tell you how much influence you're gaining for a certain amount of hours. Don't get confused by the names. It's just something that they named it, right? So when you see send the house or things like that, it's just a name. But the important part is how many hours are you putting into these players? When you get to where you can soft sell and hard sell, they're also going to have the green triangles as well. And that's going to tell you how much influence you're gaining. And you're going to notice that a soft sell and a hard sell is going to give you basically more bang for your buck. You're going to get more influence for less. So if you notice, a soft sell is going to cost 20 hours and a hard sell is going to cost 40 hours. Well, on a hard sell, you can probably get up to 5 influence gain points, when a send the house would also give you 5, but a send the house costs 50 hours. So it's really important to start using that soft sell and hard sell when you can, after you figured out what their ideal pitch is. Now, if you haven't figured out the ideal pitch, you can basically go through and guess. You can do a process of elimination. Now, sometimes you can't guess it because there's too many combinations, right? You'll go through on the recruiting screen and you'll see that there will be multiple combinations that might include one green check mark that you might have. And you could have multiple red X's. You might even have 2 green check marks. But at that point, you can start to see what the different combinations will be. And if you see what the different combinations are, then you can start to narrow down what might be their ideal pitch based on what you have and don't have checked, right? So if you know, like for example, if you've got championship contender and you know that this is a part of 4 combinations, I'm making this up completely, then you can go through and look at the 4 different combinations and you can see, okay, if some of the other values are already X'd out, then I know that it's not that. And then if you go through and look and you see, okay, I got 2 left that it could be, then what you can do is either you can continue to do one of the general actions to uncover it, or one thing that I like to do is I can double up on my soft sells. So I'll do one soft sell on one category, and then I'll do another soft sell on another category. And that way you can do basically kind of a double whammy type of thing. And then the next week, it'll uncover what the ideal pitch is. One other thing about uncovering the motivations and the ideal pitch is that you got to keep in mind that the deal breaker is also a part of the ideal pitch. So when it comes to doing the process of elimination thing, you already know that you have one of their motivations in their deal breaker. Now, sometimes they'll give you a green check mark that is also the deal breaker, which is kind of annoying. But there are times when you can get a green check mark that's not the deal breaker. So then that just gives you an extra method to kind of break down, the ideal pitch a little bit easier. If you get to the point where you realize, okay, I only have one combination left, you can go ahead and soft sell or hard sell on that one combination because you've basically just eliminated all other possibilities. And then at that point, you have what you need to soft sell or hard sell. Now, keep in mind, the other piece of this strategy is hour management. And it's something that I'm going to say a lot, right? Because even if you can hard sell, that doesn't necessarily mean you always want to, right? Now, if you had, for example, 50 hours allocated to somebody, then you can reallocate that 50 as a 40 hard sell and a 10 DM the player, right? So you can do that. Or if you need the hours and you have a pretty decent lead, then you go in and you do a soft sell for 20, and you might even want to add a 10 on there, or you can just do the soft sell. And then you're still going to get a decent amount of influence, but you can use those hours somewhere else, right? So that's just kind of like giving you a little bit of a tip on how I would go about kind of rearranging some of this stuff. It really just depends on what you need and when. So like, if you got a guy that you're really trying to go after and, he's one of the top prospects on your board, then you may not want to cut his hours, right? But you can cut hours for somebody that you have a decent lead on that may not be as important, but you can do that by soft selling, right? If you understand what their ideal pitch is, you can soft sell just to cut the hours back and still get a decent amount of influence. So it just comes down to managing hours again. So once you get the ideal pitch figured out, you're going to want to hard sell at some point. Hard selling is going to allow you to get the most bang for your buck, and it's going to allow you to gain a decent amount of influence and basically close the deal, right? Swaying obviously is not going to let you do that. And soft selling only can take you so far, especially if you're in a tight race with another, big time school or any school in general, right? So you're going to want to hard sell at some point. Hard sell is literally the same thing as soft selling. It's just that it gives you more influence and it costs a little bit more. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you get ready to soft and hard sell, you got to remember that this is where your my school grades are going to come into play. When you do your general actions, your DM the player, search social media, all of that stuff, my school grades are not factored into that because they're just general actions. Your soft sell, hard sell is when you're basically selling them on their ideal pitch or whatever pitch you decide to try and uncover, right? That's where your my school grades are going to come into play. So when you get into a recruiting race with, one or two other schools, if they have better grades than you, they can make up ground if they're behind you, or they can just build a lead that you just will not be able to recover from simply because they have better grades than you. And this is where your sway mechanic would come in, because if you don't have good grades in certain categories that's a part of their ideal pitch, you might want to go in and sway and see if you can basically shift them to another ideal pitch. That's what the sway mechanic is. The problem with this is that it doesn't give you as much influence as a soft or hard sell, And if you use it too much or at the wrong time, you can lose a lot of ground. If you're behind, you can lose ground. But if you are ahead, some of the other teams could actually like come up and steal a recruit from you. Now on College Football 25, sometimes, if schools had better high school grades, they could actually just steal a recruit and you just wouldn't really know. Like you knew what it was, but it just kind of didn't make sense that they would be able to just steal it from you. But on this year's game, they have the recruiting battle. So when you get to the end in a tight race, it'll actually prolong the process just a little bit, just to give you a little extra time to be able to make one more, or maybe even two more pushes. Just kind of depends on, the timing and how close they are to a decision. So it's just things to keep in mind. It's here again, it's managing your time, it's shifting your time around and selling at the right time. You don't want to wait too long. You definitely don't want to wait too long to scout, and you don't want to overuse sway because it's just not a mechanic that you abuse. It's just something that's really a strategic tool. Now, the other thing you can do once a recruit gets to the top 5 stage is you can schedule visits. Now, I've kind of changed my stance on visits recently because I had a visit actually help me get a recruit. At least I'm pretty sure that's what it was. But basically, I used to not schedule visits a lot, especially on 25. Like I started doing it because it was a feature. And then once I realized it wasn't really helping me that much, I just kind of stopped. But in reality, they actually give you a decent amount of influence. And they also have what's called complimentary visits. So if you schedule a visit for one player in a position group that's complementary to another position, like for example, if you have a quarterback and then you schedule a visit for a receiver, they'll both get an extra boost. It's small, but they'll get a boost for being on the same visit, right? Now, this also works if you basically schedule the same position the same week, you can get a negative impact. So if you have, 2 quarterbacks, well, they're competing for the same role, right? So it really just depends. But scheduling visits actually can be a helpful tool, especially if it comes down to the wire between you and another school. And you can also get a bonus if you schedule it during a game and you win that game, especially if it's a rivalry game. I think you get even more of a bonus if it's a big game. So just something to keep in mind there, but definitely schedule visits when you can. They tweaked it on 26 to where visits will cost less if the player is closer to you. So definitely use it if it costs 10 or 20 hours because it doesn't cost as much. Now, the ones that's 30 or 40 hours, I get it, right? It's a little expensive, but definitely when you have the time to schedule them, definitely try and fit them in if you can because they can be a useful tool. But here again, not required, at least in my opinion. All right, so here's the deal. The last piece that I would say is really important, probably just as important as the preseason week scouting, but a little underrated, is just understanding when to cut your losses, right? A great man once said, you got to know when to hold them and when to fold them. Well, this applies in this situation because here's the deal, guys. You can't get everybody. It's as simple as that. You will not be able to get everybody, especially if you're in a rebuild school that's got, 500 hours for you. You just don't have the resources, and that's okay. Your rebuild might take 2 to 3 seasons because you're going to have to basically do quality over quantity and get who you can and try and do the rest of the cleanup in the transfer portal, or at least do the rest of the cleanup in the next season, right? So it's okay if you can't get everybody. Like I said in the first video, it's very rare, even though I probably could do it now in my 4th or 5th season, it's very rare that I have a full 35 players. One, because I like having some room for the transfer portal, but also because I don't have enough hours to spend to get 35 guys. I have enough hours to get maybe 25, right? Realistically. And then from there, Georgia comes in and steals all my players, right? So if you're in, some rebuild or even a 4-star school for that matter, you're going to get a lot of recruits that are going to get stolen by Alabama and LSU and Georgia and Clemson. Clemson takes a lot of talent, but I know last season I had Georgia steal 5 recruits from me alone. And that's just Georgia. And I probably lost like a total of probably 12, right? And it's unfortunate in the moment, but you got to remember that you can do training to get your players better. And your players are going to do most of their progression in the offseason anyway. And most of these guys you're recruiting aren't going to play for at least a season or two. Like I said, unless you're at a rebuild school, right? So just know when to cut your losses. I mean, it's as simple as that. Everything that you do in recruiting is going to come down to managing your hours, being able to shift them around from week to week, okay, and understanding that you can't get everybody, and you got to be able to cut your losses when you're going to lose, right? Because the thing is that you're going to get to a point where, if you can tell that a recruit is going to go pick somebody else and they got a significant lead on you, well, then use those hours on somebody else. Simple as that, right? And then make up the rest in transfer portal and make up the rest in the offseason with your training. All right, so that pretty much does it for this part of the series. I hope that you got some good tips out of these first two videos. And ultimately, if this helped you, please let me know in the comment section. If you got any feedback, let me know in the comment section. And I will try and reply to everyone if you have any questions or anything like that. But remember, please leave a like, leave a subscribe, and I will probably try and make another video just taking us through a specific example. But for the most part, hopefully this helped you out. Appreciate you sticking around. Y'all take it easy.